Let me start. One of the central observations of Marcel's philosophy is that the world is broken. And one of the aspects of its brokenness is that we are experiencing a crisis of meaning. And in his language, he calls it unsatisfied ontological need. And that need represents um, our need to participate in being as opposed to merely representing a set of functions in a broken world. And in the modern world, everything and everyone becomes viewed in terms of function, and all questions are approached with technique. And this is evident in the dependence on the technology, the immediate deferral to the technological as the answer to any problem, and the tendency to think of technical reasoning as the only mode of access to the truth. He states that the broken world is one that, on the one hand, riddled with problems, and on the other, determined to allow no room for mystery. The denial of the mysterious is symptomatic of the modern broken world and is tied to its technical character, which only acknowledges what it can address, the problematic. So whatever it can analyze, it can only talk about that. But distinction between problem and mystery is one that hinges, like much of Marcel's thought, on the notion of participation. So this is his idea of a broken world, and he breaks it down into several topics. One of them, man as an object, man as a function, life as a problem to be solved, communication without communion, and eclipse of the sacred. So I'm just going to touch on all of these concepts just to explain what he's talking about. When man becomes a function, his worth is tied to his productivity and efficiency, and what he contributes to a system rather than who he is matters. And in this functionalist view, identity collapses into performance, and Marcel saw this as a symptom of our technological and bureaucratical civilization, where people are optimized and instrumentalized. So we are dehumanized and our being is reduced to a problem. A man treats being and others as an object to manipulate rather than a presence to encounter. And true knowing, though, is ontological participation when we are in relationship before we analyze. So I'm going to play a short clip from 1927 film Metropolis.
Is there any sound or is it just silent?
Oh, it was supposed to be sound, but it's just music. I don't know why it's not actually coming through. Yeah.
Sometimes you have to click a special button.
Maybe.
Says include
Maybe.
sound.
Yeah, there were no words, just music, but it's quite dramatic. So these were scenes from the film Metropolis, which was shot in 1927. And this is the first time, I believe, that the term Moloch was used in this context to portray the modern world as a devouring furnace of perverse intentions, which we've come across with Schmachtenberger, and he must have been directly influenced by this scene, I suppose. Man as an object is very much related to man as a function. And to treat man as an object for Marcel means to strip away his mystery, reducing him to something that can be analyzed, categorized, or used. So in the modern world, this happens when people are seen through data and through roles, or through statistics, rather than as living human beings or lived experience. And this objectified person becomes a consumer or a resource, rather than a human being with depth. And this type of mindset destroys communion, which I'll explain a little bit later what he means by it, and turns living beings into things among other things. We live in a world where we often think of others and ourselves even as objects in the situation. For example, a supermarket cashier fulfilling their role without engaging with customers for the sake of speed, or not making an eye contact with people on the street in order to minimize our vulnerability. On the New York tube, on the New York subway, it's an unspoken rule that people avoid eye contact in order not to appear aggressive and get into trouble. Oh, this is going to be wasted now because there is sound to this. It's from film Gattaca, and they are discussing the birth of their child, and the doctor is offering them to scan the embryo and remove all undesirable things. So what they're basically trying to say here is that the life is not anymore considered to be a gift, but it's a problem to be solved. So the most important part, this unknown and mystery which we cannot perceive, has been removed to get to something which we can logically analyze and manipulate. But yeah, I wish I could port this sound across, but maybe it is in the share settings, and I probably don't have time to do that. But so moving on to communication without communion. Marcel distinguished communication, the exchange of information, from communion, which is the meeting of persons. And in our world, we do a lot of communication, but very little communion. Messages fly, but presence, empathy, and mutual understanding are not there. And that again goes back to treating other people as set of functional functions or objects rather than true human beings. And then we make these deliberate decisions that there are some special people that will get that preferential treatment. So without communion, our connections are very thin and transactional. And good example of explaining communication without communion is the mode in which we communicate. For example, when we have business meetings, they're usually organized within a very tight time-bound basis, and insist on clarity and succinctness. The transmission of information focuses on efficiency, and any digression from strictly topical might be seen as a waste of time. In most cases, it doesn't even matter whether the exchange of information happens through email, video call, or in person. And now, as is the case, we communicate gladly with the AI, not even being able to make the distinction. I'll talk something about the presence, which is one of the topic or concepts that he is referring to often. Presence he defines as something that, when it is apparent to another, reveals me to myself and makes me more fully myself. And it is possible for another to give us the recognition and affirmation of ourselves that fulfills the need for bonding with others. And one example of that, which is very interesting, is charm. And it seems to be one of the ways that presence can make itself felt. It seems like an extra part of some people's personality, which they can give or gift to others. And because it doesn't work with everyone, it shows its non-objective characteristic, but it's not subjective. It is what he calls intersubjective, and it cannot be transmitted as a message from one subject to another. So the communion in which presences become manifested to each other and the transmission of purely objective messages, they do not belong to the same realm of being. He goes on to say that presence cannot be seized or grasped. It is something that can only be gathered to oneself or shut out from oneself. And the last thing, life reduced to a problem, and I'm actually connecting this with life without the sacred. So he says that it's very difficult in our world to consider life is a gift, and we've destroyed its sacredness because of the emphasis on the biological and scientific in our way of life. We simply cannot consider the possibility of it being a gift. And this refusal leads to loss of the spiritual quality of the relationship between father and son, and it becomes an objective relationship. And I think he here refers to Christianity as well. And life without the sacred is flattened to what can be measured and controlled. Then it's an interesting notion of magical. He says that to understand what magical is, we should consider the difference between a word and a poem. So, for example, word rose, when it appears in a garden catalog, is nothing more than a name to us, but the rose in a poem gives us the essence of the rose. And presence, from the point of view of understanding it in discussion, can probably only be glimpsed at. Then he talks about mystery as opposed to problem, and he says that problem is something which we meet, which we find complete in front of us, but which we can reduce and solve. All the information for solving the problem is containerized or self-contained, but a mystery is something in which we ourselves are involved, and therefore it cannot be reduced. So every time we try to turn mystery, the situation which includes us, try to reduce to a problem, we've lost ourselves in the equation, because we ourselves are not solvable. We cannot reduce ourselves, and we cannot solve our participation there. And the last thing is just broken world, as opposed to Bauman's liquid modernity, Baudrillard's end of history, Vervaeke's meaning crisis, Schmachtenberger's meta crisis. And it was somebody else who had legitimation crisis. I think, I forgot. Was it Habermas? Or, and then I've got the table that we can discuss how Marcel's view of the broken world maps into some of the ideas and concepts of the meta-modernism, and that would be it. So thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to having a conversation.
Great, thank you. Really fascinating. I feel like we might want to sort of read that table a bit more. That was a very
yeah. I was thinking as well, but let me just do it.
That's quite a key.
Oh, sorry, it's something gone wrong. Can you see it?
Or maybe you can share it in the chat, and we can.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, let me just do that.
I wonder, could you actually go back one slide? I just want to do a screenshot of it.
I can, yeah. I mean, I can provide the whole thing. It's not a problem, but unless you need it now in order to. Let me just paste.
That's great. Thank you.
Can I paste the screenshot in the chat?
I think you should be able to. Okay, I've just done it.
Okay, options, clipboard. Oh, that's it. Yeah, you've done it. Okay, and I'll do the previous one if it's.
Great. I mean, yeah, it'd be great to have a sort of open discussion. I think you're absolutely right. This is definitely sort of one of the precursors of the meta crisis idea, and so fits very nicely into our sort of informal research program around the meta crisis and the Second Renaissance. I suppose what I'm interested in also exploring is like his proposed solution. So, we have, I guess, Second Renaissance as an idea of the way out of the meta crisis, and I guess he's known as a Christian, and so Christianity is part of the solution for him. And it's interesting that he uses the term communion there, which has strong Christian resonances. I wonder if that's something you've explored. I'm also just curious to hear how you came across his work and whether it's a sort of long-standing interest of yours.
Yeah, I deliberately tried to connect because instinctively, even though I do know that he's a Christian existentialist, I cannot detect it as such. The only trace of it I found, like a clear connection within this communion term used. He talks a lot about reverence and love and affection and openness, but again, we all use that sort of stuff now. So it doesn't seem to be linked to his religious belief in any particular way. But that was interesting. And the only reason why I actually looked it up, because you mentioned it in the announcement about the presentation that he was Christian existentialist. And I didn't, I find more Christianity in Kierkegaard than, for example, than him.
I mean, I think that there must be some Christian elements in his thought, I guess, for him to be, for that to be the sort of header in the Wikipedia page, as it were. But and I think that aspect would also have resonances with some of Vivek's ideas, where Vivek is quite interested in exploring, I think, Christianity in particular among the world religions or sort of new forms of Christianity and religiosity as solutions to the meaning crisis.
Yeah. I mean, Neo-Platonism is also, or even Neo-Socratism is something that is connected to Marcel as well.
Usa has her hand up.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to comment that in terms of this being connected to religion, I think it feels a lot as if. Okay, so I come from the only city in Sweden that is actually religious, basically. We're basically a secular country, and I grew up with a lot of people who are religious, and the thing that I noticed with them were that the ones who had lost their faith, lost the feeling that there was something that was bigger than themselves. And I think this is also something that, I'm not sure if it's Karen Armstrong who's talking about it, that when you lose the sense of there is something bigger than yourself, and you lose the sense of mystery, and you lose the the willingness to live. So I think it's interesting that he has a religious background, because he must have experienced this feeling of something that is bigger than himself. And it is this parallel to the world that is today. Like, if you were to lose your sense of meaning in the world that is today, it's sort of like, it's almost like you're losing God.
Yeah, but it's interesting. It's very actually similar to Heidegger, in a sense that he talks a lot about being, and being is our existential need, and being essentially is relational, which means your relationship with yourself, with others, and with the world. And that world can mean anything. So probably in his case, he's referring to the God, but then the modern metamodernists are not alien to the idea of God anymore.
Bob, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, thanks. Just on the narrow point of Marcel being a precursor to Vervaeke, actually, a lot of it sounded so Vervaeke to me. I thought, well, wait a minute, maybe Vervaeke just cites Marcel. So I dug into it and I threw a link into the chat. And yeah, heck yes, Vervaeke's directly like quoting Marcel. So it's not like it's a casual relationship, right? And you know, and Vervaeke's also mining Heidegger and the whole existentialist tradition a lot. So yeah, the river runs through it for sure.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It looks like it's particularly the idea of the mystery that he's referring to in Marcel.
Revealing yourself through other, the idea of secondary reflection as well. I didn't cover that, but there is an idea of primary and secondary reflection, and you can only get to it by reflecting self of the other, which is again, I'm not sure whether it's Hegelian or
I can jump in. I'd just like to clear up a sort of slight discomfort that a lot of the language was very masculine oriented. I didn't hear anything of, lots of father and son and him and stuff. And I just wondered, is that just the convention of the day when he was writing, or do you think there is some overlooking, if you like, of the feminine consciousness, the feminine sensibility, perspective, or I think it's just something I'd like to ask, because the language is so male dominated.
I agree. I actually felt it the same way, but only now that you mention it, I felt that the whole lot was missing in that sense. But I suppose I was quite absorbed by what he was saying, and partly because just like what Robert mentioned, it sounds so much like Vervaeke, and I looked for any quotes or influences, and they're not there. But it is very much part of it. But I agree. It seems to me that it was the language of the time.
I'm going to speak, but I'm not sure if I can. I'm just going to try and form it as I speak, because it's kind of, I think the speaking from, rather than saying male, from the kind of let's use the term masculine principle, which is kind of, which has been the way of being for, let's say, thousands of years, probably, maybe even since the dawn of agriculture. So I think it's so embedded in our way of being, even for us who are women. It's so embedded in the kind of frameworks and our language. It's like the fish that doesn't know it's in water. I think we're only just really sticking our heads up and feeling it. And I think women will probably feel it more because we are intrinsically, most of us have that feminine principle balanced that way more within us. But as we're starting to get voices of people who are more diverse in their sexuality and their gender, that's also helping us to kind of look again at how we're speaking and how we're forming. And there is just everything Martin said. I can hardly discuss it because it's so agreeable to the way I'm thinking. Sometimes it's difficult when someone gives a really good presentation to say, what can we talk about? Because it just sounds so good. But there is a sense for me that many of our problems are because of masculine perspectives and certain men who are embodying it in a very, very strong way, in the way they act in the social sphere, in their families, and in institutions and in government. And I think we're only just really starting to see how destructive it is. And I'm so delighted to be in a space like this where I see men just working that rock face so beautifully and kind of breaking it down and becoming self-aware. I don't think women have as much work to do. I think our work is to watch and be pleased to a great degree as we see it, blossoming. So yeah, I've said enough.
Yeah, just sort of some thoughts came up for me in this discussion of femininity. I'm thinking of the author whose name I can't quite pronounce, Luce Irigaray, who is a sort of French psychoanalyst slash philosopher who was very influenced by Heidegger, but very much sort of confronting his ideas from what you might call feminine perspective. I think her whole thinking is about, what would a feminine philosophy look like? And one of the things she introduces into this, and I mentioned Heidegger because that's very close to Marcel's thoughts here. So I think you can make a similar confrontation to Marcel. I think one of the things she suggests that we need to focus on from a feminine perspective that isn't focused on in Heidegger is firstly the body and the breath. So she's very interested in the yogic tradition, for example. And I guess secondly, the idea of sexual difference. And I guess that's something you didn't cover, Momcilo, in your sort of overview there, the difference between men and women just having some philosophical relevance.
I also didn't want to talk about the mystery of the family bond. That also features in Gabriel Marcel's philosophy, but I actually dislike that idea that we should have this stronger relationship just on the basis of our kinship. I'm much more into relating to everyone, so I chose not to actually quote that side.
I would wanted to say something. I don't have a clear anchor for how these discussions proceed or this community or anything. But as you spoke, I mean, I also echo that, almost everything you said resonated in a really sort of, like, it spoke to me as articulating something true and attractive. And I was thinking all the way through, I guess I didn't know anything about him, but I could sense there was Christianity, and I quickly looked it up, and it is emphasized. I mean, part of what I think about that Christianity side might be that Christianity, prior to being institutionalized in any way, probably captured a lot more of what he is. It's the negative aspects that institutionalization of Christianity brought with it are not necessarily attached to the things he's expressing there. But if we were to go back to what Jonah said, to start to think about, well, what would this mean for responses or practices or solutions, then some form of institutionalization probably becomes, even if it's light touch and informal, inevitable, and one would have to wrestle with it. So there's a sort of abstract point in there about some of what he's rejecting or juxtaposing what he's talking about too is probably still either necessary or inevitable, if only to make sense of what he's talking about, so that you could sit here and listen to this and appreciate it, but actually implementing it engages with its boundaries. That's a very abstract point. The other thing I kept thinking of was nature and the earth and indigenous thinking, and that's tied up, I think, with femininity. But I wonder, it seems to me from one angle, this could be just as resonant as speaking of indigenous knowledge systems and communion with the earth and the mystery of nature. From another hand, I get a feeling he wouldn't, as an individual, agree with that at all, but I don't know. And does it matter?
But someone asked about the healing side of it. I think it was Jan. So he does identify what is wrong with us and with the society. And he says, meeting others as thou, not it. Fidelity and availability, which is really interesting thing, that sense of availability, being available for others. So that availability has disappeared and is not appreciated anymore, because if you're available, it means you've got nothing better to do. Really interesting how it's culturally changed its meaning. Participation in relationship as opposed to possession. So you don't actually possess another person. You don't try to bind them. You are celebrating their being, and their being is wherever their being takes them, which is really interesting. And then he talks about embodied participation in the world with incarnate engagement, being a presence among presences. So just doubling up on your being as an investment, similar to what Bourdieu said as well. Treat your being something that you invest and gives you more, so you can invest into more being. And the only way to do it is to go crazy about it, just to try to break down all the obstacles to it, to open yourself to the world. So and I really believe, and he's not the only guy. I probably that is why I actually decided to do presentation on him, because he stands behind these things, which I think are key to our future, which is collaboration and better relationality with each other.
I'm not sure. I can't raise my hand. I'm on the browser.
Go ahead, please.
Go ahead, yeah, please go ahead.
Thank you. I wanted to raise a bit of a conversation around technology, because he talks about, that seeing people as data and basically a very negative role of technology. And in my work, I look at, this is my daily problem, right? That the technology that we're mostly using today is being used to support a paradigm which I am not in support of, and I'm trying to figure out how we can appropriate technologies. So I'm trying to figure out, basically, I think I want to ask you about the role of technology in another society, like in the opposite of this kind of scenario. If we're actually trying to aim for mystery, like if we're trying to aim for connection and trying to use technology to further that connection, if we're trying to do conviviality, Illich. I'm just curious on your perspectives on that, because it's something that I tackle.
Sorry, who was the question for?
If anybody has any thoughts on how you can actually use technologies to support the opposite of this, to not treat man as an object, to support mystery, to support connection, to make sure that the ideas that we have are being spread, because it's a double-edged sword. It's not just negative. It depends on what we use with it, right? What we use it for. So the question is, what's your thoughts on technology in this context?
I'd like to jump in there if that's okay. To me, a lot of it is to do with the way that it's the design process. And if you kind of, my vision, I think with technology is to design it in such good connection with the different people who are, the variety of people who are actually going to use it, and how they see the world which they are relating to through the technology, that it does serve, that it really does serve the people. And obviously there's a big problem here, which I've noticed many times, is that without a very conscious user-centered, okay, user is a funny word, but let's accept it for the moment, user-centered sort of perspective, programmers who are of course majority male tend to design for themselves, and without a sort of very clear input for of other people. Obviously that can be got around, but yes, I think that's my response to that. But if I can just tack on another point, I'd like to pick up what Jen was saying about being easier for women. And actually I see in the original description, it's like maybe the crisis of meaning is more of a masculine problem than it is for women, maybe. And therefore, maybe this idea of communion is something which we as men have to, I'm just obviously talking very generalized here, have to struggle for more than, and it comes easier to some people. The communion comes easier, and so I see Marcel seeing this from that perspective. And actually, I think it's related, actually, because yeah, there is a connection there between those 2 points, but I'll leave that for other people to pick up.
Jen?
This is really interesting material, because I think we're kind of getting somewhere with it, because women have we're talking about communion, all that sort of thing, these kind of sensation things, and it's to do with instead of talking about the divine or religion, we could talk about life. So what brings life? And of course, women are more connected with life and nurturing just biologically. Most women are in that, whether they have children themselves or not. We're much more centered in that feeling. So, and it might seem trivial that yesterday I'm in a room and the man's got just a nasty bare central light on in his room, and it's just like, oh my gosh, and I turn the side lights on and turn the center light off. It's a tiny thing, but it's about creating conviviality, comfort, nest making. And I think if we do that on the online spaces, it's about and it's also not just about the actual design of the space, but the quality of the facilitation which allows, or even designs. So I've been in a lot of game spaces. 3 of my children work in the online game industry and are hugely into games and patterns and artistry and design. And young people are having a ball of a time online and chatting and engaging, and also getting caught up with stuff that's not so nice because it's quite cleverly designed. But I think if we think about that in terms of creating online spaces, I think a woman's design of an online space is going to be more of a coffee shop than a research group like here. We may well be discussing research items, but it will be in this more comfortable, relational, flowy sort of space. My 6 penny.
Bob?
Thanks. So Yeah, I'm involved in a couple of startups that are doing things with humans and AI. So a lot of this research, let's say the Marcel perspective, filtered through maybe the Vervaeke perspective and some of the more recent psychologists, is rather key to my thinking. One of the people I'm involved with, I've got this long old thread in the forum that's David Joseph, so you can all read like 90 posts of that stuff anytime you feel like it. But the gist of it is I keep leaning on him to say, yeah, I love your data structure, but where's the grounding? Okay, and what I mean by grounding is human in the loop. Okay, so among other things, I'm getting at that from an IT security angle, because if you really drill into IT security, there's a reason we keep having to stick our thumbprints on things all the time in order to log in and so forth, because ultimately nothing digital is ultimately trustworthy, because digital can just be unlimitedly copied by anybody for whatever reason. So it's fundamentally untethered to grounded reality. Okay, so all of these AI agents, I mean, I'm going to be on a research call with Microsoft senior engineers this afternoon specifying agentic AI ideas for workforce development. So I'm kind of going up into mortar, so to speak. But the whole deal is you can be as crafty as you want to with your algorithms. You're not going to replicate the human without, involving humans. And that really just takes us straight back to everything Marcel is saying. I would sort of put Marcel kind of at the roots of that chain. And the only way to get deeper is you have to go deeper into philosophy and theology of the ancients. And by the way, I would say deeper than that, which Vervaeke also acknowledges would be the spiritual practices of the hunter-gatherer shamanistic cultures, which is probably, at the roots of all of it, unless you want to get back to cosmic evolution itself. So anyway, long story short, yeah, AI is definitely a coming thing, and no one who wants to deal with complex roles in society from now on can afford to be without it. But I would definitely, hang on to the Marcel perspective, every step of the way, because letting go of that perspective will lead to all manner of nonsense, which we could go into quite a bit, but maybe not right this minute.
Sorry, can I just jump in there and answer that? Is that okay?
Mm.
Or was somebody on the line? I think it's very interesting that you mentioned AI, because I've been so tired of the AI discussion, but it's really interesting to hear you talk about it. I actually read this blog post today by Cory Doctorow where he's talking about, it's the first thing I hear about it, but it might be true, that there's going to be like a burst bubble with AI, because you can't actually, they're burning out, and we're talking about like 3, 4, 5 years. And because they also have to recuperate their costs, right? And they can't do that in that amount of times. And I'm not sure if that's correct or not. That's not what I mean. I just mean what's interesting about his point was that he was saying that what will we do with this infrastructure if there is a bubble that has burst? Because speaking of appropriating technology, it would be interesting to see how you can actually use this perspective and like use this technology for a completely different reason than it was actually developed. So from my point of view, I would see it, because I work with these small communities, right? I would see it as, I don't know, off the top of my head, like an elder, like an elder in the community that would be able to retain knowledge and process that knowledge in partnership with humans, not replacing humans, but also like multi-generationally. So, I mean, that would be really interesting as a support mechanisms to human communities that are run in a completely different way from how we're seeing the process heading today. I found it a bit interesting. I found it, inspiring, but it's early days. Sorry for jumping in.
That was really interesting. So I'm working on a little bit of a project, which I'm hoping to get people in on, which is turning the AI infrastructure upside down and starting with like little AIs, tiny AI, which are just like libraries that are holding local knowledge, the knowledge, the farmer's almanac, the bioregional information, and it's curated. It's not like this huge, enormous, vast, vile thing full of nonsense. So it's like that, and then you upscale to slightly larger ones which support it. So you might send a request to your local AI. If it can't manage that request, it gets knocked up the thing. So we're actually turning it upside down. So I'm applying for an Arts Council grant to start some small ones. I'm going to see if I get some other people in on it to start some small local ones. We're looking at only about £2,000 for a solo-driven local AI unit, and then we'll work with the community into kind of building, curating the material and setting up systems for curating it in. There's always going to be questions and problems with it, but it's just trying to look at what happens afterwards. Like you said, Ula, you know, what do we do when the bubble bursts?
Yeah, I guess I just wanted to add on the topic of AI. I do think when we're talking about AI and this kind of emphasis on relationality, it's important to sort of pay attention to the ways in which AI can potentially replace human relationships. And I think that's something that Zach Stein talks a lot about in terms of the risks of AI in, for example, an educational context, or sort of therapeutic context. That there is actually just this sort of straightforward risk of we're talking to an AI and not to a human being, and so that is a real risk to human relationality. In that sense, AI is different from some other technologies, like the video conferencing technology that we're using right now that is currently facilitating human interaction in a way. And so from that point of view, I'd say sort of in general, technology and the potential positive uses of technology is something that both Marcel and people like Heidegger and did kind of fail to pay attention to. It was more of a sort of blanket condemnation of technology that they had, and sort of and I think the same for the sort of scientific worldview as well. They kind of lump science and technology together, and I think that's where Vervaeke, as a sort of counterpoint, is very good in showing how actually there's a positive use of scientific reasoning as well, and that actually can be integrated with this spiritual, relational perspective.
Yeah, I just have to say that Marcel didn't condemn. He wasn't a Luddite. He was just criticizing the social transformations arising from science and technology, how it sort of penetrated places which it shouldn't have. That's how I understood it. So I think he's closer to Vervaeke in that sense.
Yeah, it's just a sort of where you focus the attention, and like, do you actually explore positive uses of technology? I don't think Heidegger did that, for example. I don't know about Marcel. And we're coming to the end of the hour. Does anyone sort of need to head off soon, or should we keep going for a little bit?
I'm still in. It's fairly late. I'll probably go after this hour just to sleep.
Pleasure to meet you, Bronwyn.
But I've really enjoyed it. I really appreciate the discussion.
Great. Well,
yeah, just a final. I mean, it's really just sort of not repeating, but slightly extending the points that Jen was just making. Is that how I pronounce it, Jen? Which is that I recently have also been reading about this bubble predictions, and in the same context, reading that there has always been the capacity right from the beginning to develop AI in the way that you spoke about, Jen, or not necessarily around bioregioning, but in the sense of doing it on a small scale. And the Silicon Valley method is very specific and far more negative on all sorts of environmental and relational dimensions than it needs to be. So it felt, reading this stuff, that there was so much. I mean, I also hate the topic at the moment as an educator. I can't escape it, and but yeah, it's reviving I don't know, I feel really mixed. When I first came across blockchain, I also thought there were lots of potential there, and now that feels similar to AI. So I don't know where it's going, but I think it's good to recover these senses of possibilities. But yeah, the sunk cost of what's happened already is a bit frightening. Anyway, I'll leave it at that. And thank you all.
Thank you.
Marty, you would like to say something?
Maybe just say if Bronwyn's still on the call. If you're interested in sort of joining the research group, feel free to sort of ping me a message on WhatsApp. There's a research WhatsApp that you can potentially.
I'll do that, because I did send one to Rufus, and he said try and attend a call first. So I
great. Okay.
jumped on. Yeah.
Excellent.
Okay. Thanks. Bye.
Marty, welcome. And interested to hear what you've got to say.
Yes, sorry, I've been lurking here, enjoying the discussion so very much. Thank you. It's been quite remarkable. Unfortunately, I had some links. I was talking with Jonas, and I had the wrong link, so I found this link some other way. And it's just been beautiful. In particular, I so appreciated the discussion of maybe what I'd call the feminine archetype in all of this discussion, trying to distinguish it from gender and sex, but feeling more into the energy of the feminine, which I'm, aware of and try to embody sometimes even. I appreciated the AI discussion, the redirection of the way we think about technology and AI in particular toward human relationality itself and what that means, not so much conceptually, but more in an embodied and experiential sense, and how human relationships. And I'm part of another community called Wisdom Exchange, and the focus on mutuality and the focus on embodied relationality is such an important part of what the community is trying